The story of Tamar, daughter of King David, is one of the most painful and powerful narratives in the Old Testament. A story of betrayal, inaction, and the heavy toll of silence within the royal family of Israel. This ancient tragedy raises deep questions about justice, protection, and the responsibilities of those in positions of power. How did David, a man after God's own heart, allow such pain to unfold under his own roof? Why did he fail to intervene? And what impact did his silence have on his children and his kingdom? By exploring the moral, familial, and spiritual lessons from Tamar's story, we gain insight into the high cost of ignoring injustice, especially within the family. Through the complexities and consequences within David's household, we find timeless lessons on leadership, morality, and the importance of taking action when it matters most. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to explore more powerful biblical stories and the life-changing lessons they hold. The devastating silence of David. The story of Tamar, daughter of King David, is one of the most tragic narratives in the Old Testament, exposing the devastating consequences of silence and parental inaction. When Tamar was violated by her half-brother Amnon, the aftermath revealed deep fractures within the royal family. David's silence following the assault, instead of providing justice, created a void that would haunt his family for generations. This inaction not only intensified Tamar's suffering but also served as a catalyst for further turmoil within the house of David. David's failure to address the injustice done to Tamar has left readers and scholars questioning the reasons for his silence. Some argue that David's complex family dynamics, with children from multiple wives, created a web of rivalries and discord, making it difficult to govern familial conflicts. Yet, as a father and a king, his duty to protect and defend was clear. His silence left Tamar vulnerable, not only to the shame imposed upon her, but also to the emotional abandonment of her own family. Tamar, described as the daughter of the king, had every right to expect protection and advocacy. Yet David, a man after God's own heart, allowed her to suffer in silence. In biblical culture, where family honor and respect were paramount, this failure to respond was more than a private misstep, it was a public scandal. David's passivity sent a message to his household and the entire kingdom that even the king's daughter could face injustice without recourse. The silence of David can be seen as a failure of leadership, one that rippled through his family with devastating consequences. Tamar's brother Absalom would go on to harbor resentment, not only toward Amnon but also toward his father. This resentment festered for 2 years, eventually leading to Amnon's murder and sparking a cycle of vengeance. David's initial silence became the spark that ignited a series of destructive events, showing how inaction in times of crisis can lead to unanticipated and tragic consequences. The psychological impact of David's silence on Tamar must have been profound. As she wore the ashes of her shame and tore her royal robes, she also bore the weight of abandonment. Left unprotected by her father and humiliated by her brother, Tamar's life was forever marked by this devastating betrayal. David's lack of response reinforced her isolation, showing her that even in the palace, she was alone. Tamar's grief, combined with her father's silence, exemplifies the emotional cost of unresolved trauma in the family. From a theological perspective, David's silence invites reflection on the responsibilities of leaders to protect the vulnerable. The Old Testament is filled with mandates for kings to act justly and defend the oppressed. David's inaction here is a painful deviation from these principles, serving as a somber reminder that even a godly king can falter. His failure to address Tamar's suffering foreshadows the internal disintegration that would follow, not only in his family but within his kingdom. This silence becomes even more poignant in light of David's relationship with God. Known for his psalms of repentance and contrition, David seems incapable of recognizing the need for intervention in his own household. Where was the king who once defended his flock from lions and bears? Where was the warrior who faced Goliath? In the face of Tamar's plight, David's courage seemed to fail him. This silence is more than a personal failing, it's a moral tragedy, showing how even the mighty can stumble in matters close to the heart. David's silence also represents the struggles many parents face when confronted with conflicts among their children. Instead of taking decisive action, some parents choose avoidance, hoping the issue will resolve itself. Yet, as shown in David's story, ignoring a problem often compounds the pain. By not addressing Amnon's sin, David allowed a culture of injustice to take root, giving way to further discord and, ultimately, to Absalom's rebellion. This painful episode reveals the enduring impact of neglecting family conflicts. As the silence grew, the palace became a place of buried secrets and suppressed rage. Tamar's tragedy remained unresolved, and the weight of unspoken injustice poisoned the family. This silence did not just affect Tamar and Absalom. It set a precedent for the family's moral decay. As David's children observed their father's inaction, they absorbed a dangerous lesson about justice, or the lack thereof, in their family. This lack of response communicated that family honor was less important than preserving appearances. Ultimately, David's silence toward Tamar's suffering reflects the high cost of ignoring the vulnerable. The Bible frequently warns against inaction in the face of injustice, urging believers to protect the helpless and speak out against wrongdoing. In this instance, David's failure serves as a warning and a call to action for those in positions of power. The devastation of Tamar's life and the ensuing family chaos highlight the moral responsibility to address injustice, regardless of the cost. David's silence may have momentarily preserved his status, but it left his family in ruins. Complexity of the royal family. The family of King David is emblematic of the complexities found within royal households in ancient Israel, where multiple wives and numerous children often led to rivalry and internal discord. David's family, composed of sons and daughters from different mothers, was marked by intense competition for favor and inheritance. This web of relationships created fertile ground for jealousy and strife, especially when compounded by the king's duties and limited involvement in his children's lives. David's household was unique, filled with promises of divine favor yet tainted by human weaknesses. As the ruler chosen by God, David bore great responsibility, but his multiple marriages introduced a layer of difficulty in maintaining unity within his family. Each wife's children represented her aspirations for prominence, causing natural divisions among the offspring. Without strong parental oversight, these rivalries were left unchecked, leading to situations where personal vendettas could easily escalate. Cultural expectations in ancient Israel were also a factor in the family structure, where sons of concubines and lesser wives often felt sidelined. This sense of exclusion fed resentment among David's children, who craved acknowledgement from their father and the kingdom. The competition between them reflected not only their desire for royal status but also their need for a father's attention, a resource that, despite David's devotion to God, he struggled to provide equally. As the leader of Israel, David's position demanded much of his time and energy, often leaving his family relationships strained. Biblical texts highlight how leadership roles can affect family unity, where the demands of governance come at a cost to domestic harmony. In David's case, the very kingdom he was tasked to lead ultimately divided his household. The lack of his presence, both physically and emotionally, contributed to an atmosphere where rivalries festered unchecked. This complex family structure also paved the way for tragic events. With so many wives and offspring, David's family could not be easily controlled. The absence of a strong central figure to address issues led to fractures, creating an environment ripe for deceit and betrayal. Without a clear sense of justice within the home, those wronged, like Tamar, were left unprotected, and others, like Absalom, resorted to vigilante justice in an attempt to right familial wrongs. A striking consequence of the family's fractured structure was seen in the relationship between Amnon and Absalom. Amnon, as the eldest son, enjoyed privileges that intensified his arrogance, while Absalom, fiercely loyal to his sister Tamar, felt the pain of David's inaction deeply. This sibling rivalry was intensified by the favoritism often displayed by the king toward certain wives and their children. These dynamics underscored the instability that plagued David's household. The royal family's complexities also demonstrated how ambition can overshadow kinship. Within David's family, each child saw themselves as a potential heir, leading to power struggles that were deeply personal yet politically charged. As each child vied for recognition, the family became an arena where alliances were formed and broken, often dictated by personal gain rather than genuine relationships. The struggle for position ultimately tore the family apart. Furthermore, the royal household's internal strife reflected broader societal issues of the time. In ancient Israel, family structures were patriarchal, with authority concentrated in the father. Yet, David's growing disconnect left this system vulnerable. His family, instead of being a model of godly leadership, became an example of how fractured households can lead to societal instability. The family's infighting mirrored the instability that would eventually affect David's kingdom itself. The tragedy of Tamar, coupled with the ongoing rivalry among David's children, foreshadows the breakdown of trust within the family. Each child seemed to fend for themselves, creating an environment where self-interest ruled. This dynamic encouraged dishonesty, manipulation, and betrayal, with each child acting in their perceived best interest, even if it meant harming others. Without the guidance of a strong father figure, these traits went unchecked, leading to a legacy of discord. Ultimately, David's complex family structure reveals the struggles of maintaining unity amidst diversity in close relationships. His role as king, though respected by the nation, was undermined within his own household, where unresolved conflicts led to lasting divisions. His household stands as a cautionary example of how unchecked familial competition can lead to ruin, showing that even the wisest can fall when family bonds are compromised by ambition and jealousy. The tragedy of Tamar. Tamar's story is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women in ancient times, even within the royal family. As the daughter of King David, Tamar should have been protected and honored. However, her tragic encounter with her half-brother Amnon reveals a harrowing example of betrayal and violation. Her dignity and innocence were destroyed by someone she should have trusted, exposing the dark reality of unchecked family dynamics. Tamar was deeply affected not only by the assault but by the betrayal itself. In a society where family honor and purity were paramount, her violation carried profound social and emotional consequences. Amnon's actions left her desolate, forcing her to bear the shame of his wrongdoing. Tamar's story shows the tragic consequences of familial betrayal, highlighting the ways in which victims often bear the burdens of others' sins. The involvement of Amnon's friend Jonadab in encouraging Amnon's crime further underscores the dangers of corrupt influences. Jonadab's manipulation, suggesting Amnon's heinous plan, illustrates how individuals in positions of trust can exploit vulnerabilities to disastrous ends. His advice, motivated by selfish gain, highlights the dangers of surrounding oneself with individuals who lack integrity, a lesson tragically learned too late by Tamar. Tamar's response to the assault reveals her strength and dignity even amidst profound humiliation. She pleaded with Amnon, seeking to prevent the disgrace he was about to bring upon her and himself. Yet, despite her resistance, she was left devastated and powerless. Her dignified response underlines the courage required to speak up, even when one's voice is silenced by violence and oppression. After the assault, Tamar's grief was profound. She tore her royal robe, a symbol of her status, and poured ashes upon her head in an outward sign of her anguish. These gestures symbolized her shattered sense of self and the loss of her place in society. Her actions emphasized the depth of her pain and the hopelessness she felt in a society that failed to protect her from her own family. Tamar's brother Absalom's reaction to her tragedy further illustrates the complexity of family loyalty and justice. While Absalom comforted his sister, he also encouraged her silence, a response that reflects the difficult position victims often face in choosing between family honor and personal justice. This act of silencing, though perhaps intended to protect her, ultimately added to her burden of unspoken sorrow. The tragedy of Tamar is worsened by David's inaction. As her father and the king, David was responsible for enforcing justice, yet he did nothing. This lack of response sent a powerful message to his children and the kingdom. Even in the royal family, justice could be neglected. David's silence compounded Tamar's suffering, isolating her in her pain and betrayal. In many ways, Tamar's story mirrors the plight of other women in history whose voices have been suppressed by societal structures. Her experience highlights the vulnerability of those without power, who often bear the brunt of others' sins. Tamar's tragedy serves as a reminder of the necessity for accountability and justice, particularly for those who are marginalized or oppressed. Tamar's life, forever marked by Amnon's betrayal, stands as a testament to the enduring impact of trauma. Her sorrow and isolation reflect the consequences of violence that extend far beyond the act itself, affecting one's entire existence. Tamar's story reminds us of the long-lasting wounds inflicted by family betrayal and the deep need for justice in healing these wounds. The tragedy of Tamar remains a powerful story of innocence lost and the cost of silence. Her narrative speaks to the pain caused by those closest to us, demonstrating that betrayal by family can lead to lifelong scars. Tamar's ordeal challenges us to recognize the importance of protecting and advocating for the vulnerable within our communities, lest the silence of injustice become a legacy that haunts future generations. The cycle of vengeance of Absalom. Absalom's response to Tamar's tragedy reveals how unresolved injustice can breed deep resentment and lead to cycles of revenge. When his sister Tamar was violated by their half-brother Amnon, Absalom waited in silence for 2 years, hoping his father, King David, would act. Yet David's inaction ignited an anger in Absalom that would eventually lead him to take justice into his own hands, turning his frustration into a burning desire for vengeance. The silence of Absalom as he waited highlights the emotional toll of suppressed anger. Living under the same roof as his sister's assailant, without any sign of justice from his father, built a cauldron of rage within him. Each day that David failed to confront Amnon, Absalom's resentment grew, transforming his loyalty into bitterness. His choice to bide his time underscores the emotional complexity of a son who loved his family but could no longer accept its injustices. After 2 years, Absalom's desire for vengeance erupted as he finally orchestrated Amnon's death. By inviting his brother to a feast and ensuring he was alone and vulnerable, Absalom took matters into his own hands. The calculated nature of his revenge reveals the depth of his pain and his need to restore honor to his sister, even at great personal cost. This act of revenge, though horrific, was Absalom's attempt to claim justice when his father would not. This event marked a turning point for Absalom, setting him on a path of rebellion not only against Amnon but against David himself. In the eyes of Absalom, David's inaction had failed his family, leading him to question his father's leadership. The cycle of vengeance that began with Amnon's death continued to escalate, as Absalom's view of justice became increasingly distorted, fueling his eventual attempt to overthrow David's throne. Absalom's retaliation illuminates the destructive power of unresolved anger. His deep desire to restore his sister's dignity pushed him to seek justice on his own terms, but it also pulled him away from the family he once sought to protect. By choosing vengeance over reconciliation, Absalom's life began a descent into further violence and isolation. The cost of his vengeance shows how the pursuit of justice, when separated from forgiveness, can lead to greater turmoil. David's silence not only fueled Absalom's desire for vengeance but also influenced the way he viewed justice. Absalom's sense of right and wrong was shaped by watching his father ignore the wrongs in his own family, leaving Absalom to believe that violence was the only way to address injustice. In taking Amnon's life, he reflected his father's failure to act, showing how a lack of guidance can distort a child's moral compass. Absalom's vengeance was ultimately self-destructive. After Amnon's death, Absalom fled to Geshur to escape the consequences of his actions, alienating himself from his family and kingdom. His choice to seek justice through violence left him exiled and isolated, as the revenge that was meant to honor his sister only deepened the fractures in David's family. This tragedy underscores how vengeance can sever even the strongest familial bonds. Despite his exile, Absalom's resentment against David continued to grow, ultimately leading him to challenge his father's throne. Feeling justified in his rebellion, Absalom's desire to confront David culminated in an open war against his father. The vengeance he sought had now transformed into a rebellion, showing how a single act of revenge can spiral into wider conflicts, with devastating consequences for all involved. Absalom's story highlights the dangers of letting bitterness and revenge go unchecked. His initial desire to protect his sister's honor led him to actions that ultimately brought dishonor to himself and his family. By allowing anger to guide his decisions, Absalom sacrificed his own future and the unity of his family. His downfall is a stark reminder of how vengeance can cloud one's vision, leading to a path of destruction. The cycle of vengeance that consumed Absalom and his family serves as a powerful caution against allowing anger to take root. In seeking retribution, Absalom lost his chance to find peace and justice in his own life. His tragic end reveals the price of vengeance, urging readers to consider forgiveness as a pathway to healing rather than allowing bitterness to consume and destroy. Lessons on leadership and family. The story of David, Tamar, Amnon, and Absalom is filled with lessons on the importance of leadership within the family. David, though a mighty king, struggled to lead his own household, and his failure to act on behalf of his children set in motion a series of tragic events. This story demonstrates the unique responsibilities parents hold as leaders, especially in times of crisis. A strong leader is one who confronts difficult issues, protecting their loved ones from harm. David's silence following Tamar's assault shows the consequences of inaction, particularly for those in positions of power. As a father and king, he was called to deliver justice, yet his failure to do so left his family in turmoil. This inaction emphasizes the importance of addressing issues head-on, for neglecting to do so can lead to greater pain and resentment. A true leader provides guidance and ensures that justice is upheld, even within their own household. The lack of action taken by David highlights the importance of parental responsibility in protecting and advocating for their children. By failing to defend Tamar, David lost his daughter's trust and his son's respect. His example shows how crucial it is for parents to provide not only for their children's physical needs but also for their emotional and moral well-being. Leadership within the family begins with recognizing the need for protection and justice. David's story also serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining open communication within the family. His silence created a barrier between him and his children, leaving them to feel isolated and misunderstood. This lack of communication prevented him from understanding his children's struggles and ultimately led to disastrous consequences. Strong family leadership is rooted in a willingness to listen and to respond, creating an environment where every family member feels valued. The dynamics within David's household illustrate how family issues can escalate when there is no accountability. Without David's intervention, Tamar was left to suffer alone, and Absalom was left to seek his own form of justice. By failing to provide a framework for accountability, David allowed his children to take matters into their own hands, leading to chaos. Leadership within the family means establishing clear boundaries and ensuring that all members are accountable to each other. David's struggles as a father also highlight the challenges leaders face in balancing their public and private responsibilities. As king, David had the responsibility of ruling Israel, but his duties to his family were equally important. His story illustrates the dangers of prioritizing one's public life over private relationships, for neglecting the family can have dire consequences. True leadership requires a balance between public duty and personal responsibility. The tragedy that befell David's family emphasizes the need for parental vigilance and involvement. By failing to notice the warning signs of conflict between his children, David missed the opportunity to intervene before tragedy struck. His example underscores the importance of being attuned to one's family, recognizing potential dangers, and addressing them before they grow out of control. David's silence after Tamar's assault teaches the importance of swift and fair action in the face of injustice. As a leader, he was called to protect the vulnerable, yet his passivity sent a message of indifference. This inaction serves as a cautionary tale, showing that justice delayed is often justice denied. Effective leadership requires the courage to act decisively, even when it may be uncomfortable. In neglecting to address Tamar's plight, David failed to create a family culture rooted in respect and accountability. His children learned that wrongs could go unpunished, fostering a sense of lawlessness within the family. The story of David's household serves as a lesson on the importance of establishing moral standards within the home, where each member is treated with dignity and fairness. Ultimately, David's story calls for reflection on the role of parents as both protectors and guides. A family led with wisdom and justice is one where each member feels valued and protected. David's failures remind us of the importance of nurturing a home that is grounded in moral integrity, where even in the face of challenges, each member knows they are part of a family committed to love, respect, and justice. Divine justice and consequences of sin. The story of Tamar and David's family is a vivid portrayal of divine justice and the inevitable consequences of sin. In the Old Testament, actions bear heavy consequences, reflecting a divine order where sin brings forth suffering and loss. David's family tragedy illustrates that, even among those chosen by God, sin can corrupt and cause lasting pain. It is a reminder that God's justice often manifests through the natural consequences of one's choices. David's moral failings as a father became the seeds of his family's destruction. His own sins, adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, marked the beginning of a moral unraveling within his household. These sins cast a shadow over his life, affecting not only his relationship with God but also the future of his family. In this way, David's choices serve as a lesson on how personal sin can ripple outward, affecting generations. The consequences of David's sins echo the biblical principle of reaping what you sow. Though forgiven by God, David still faced repercussions in his personal life, as foretold by the prophet Nathan. Nathan warned him, saying, "The sword will never depart from your house." 2 Samuel 12 verse 10. This prophecy would come to pass as conflict, betrayal, and violence plagued his family, underscoring the enduring impact of transgression. The Bible's depiction of divine justice often shows that, while God is merciful, he does not shield his people from the consequences of their actions. David's silence and inaction toward Tamar's plight reveal how his previous sins may have weakened his moral authority, leading to further sin within his family. His inability to confront Amnon may stem from a fear of facing his own flaws, highlighting how unrepented sin can paralyze a person's capacity for justice. Divine justice also appears in Absalom's fate. Despite avenging his sister, his actions led him down a path of rebellion against his father, eventually leading to his death. Absalom's journey from avenger to rebel illustrates the Bible's cautionary message about taking justice into one's own hands. While he may have felt justified, his path ultimately led to judgment, reminding readers that vengeance belongs to God, not man. David's story highlights the importance of repentance in avoiding God's judgment. Though David was a sinner, he was also a man of repentance, seeking forgiveness for his actions. Yet, his failure to confront the sins within his own family contrasts with his personal repentance, suggesting that true repentance involves not only seeking forgiveness but also acting justly. Divine justice holds each person accountable, especially those with the responsibility of leadership. The consequences of sin in David's family serve as a warning about the long-lasting effects of unresolved wrongdoing. David's failure to bring justice to Tamar allowed sin to fester, leading to a cycle of vengeance and rebellion. This story illustrates that divine justice does not only affect the sinner but can bring pain to all those connected. Sin, when left unaddressed, can destroy families and communities. The notion of divine justice in David's family also raises questions about God's mercy. Although God allowed David's family to suffer the consequences of their actions, He did not abandon them. Despite their failings, God remained present, showing that divine justice is not solely punitive but also serves to guide and correct. This balance of justice and mercy reveals God's desire to bring redemption, even to those who have fallen. Through the suffering in David's family, the Bible emphasizes the necessity of righteous living. David's failings demonstrate the consequences of moral compromise, while the suffering of Tamar and Absalom underscores the cost of neglecting one's duty to protect the innocent. This story urges readers to live in a way that honors God, reminding them that righteousness is a path to peace and protection from the pain that sin brings. Ultimately, the consequences that befell David's family reveal the profound weight of sin and the justice of God's laws. As painful as these events were, they reflect a divine order that seeks to bring accountability and redemption. In witnessing the tragedy within David's household, readers are reminded of the importance of living with integrity, seeking justice, and understanding that God's justice is both a warning and a path to restoration. The tragedies that struck David's family serve as a profound warning for us today. Tamar's suffering, Absalom's vengeance, and David's inaction remind us of the power of silence and the devastation it can bring. True leadership means protecting those who cannot protect themselves, acting with integrity, and confronting wrongs no matter how uncomfortable. In your own life, consider the importance of stepping up, speaking out, and creating a foundation of justice and compassion within your family and community. The story of David and Tamar challenges each of us to take a stand, ensuring that those we care about feel valued, defended, and truly loved. So, what changes are you ready to make to protect and uplift those around you? And how can you embody justice and mercy in your daily life? Don't miss out. Subscribe for more content like this and let us know. How does Tamar's story inspire you to act with courage and compassion?